Can there be a more powerful company in the world than Apple? I mean, powerful in a good way, not powerful as in a state monopoly that has the power to force people to use it and pay it. Powerful in the best way. It makes things that people really, really want and are happy to pay for. People paid Apple over $100 billion last year because their stuff is so great. iPads, iPods, and iTunes. I'm not saying this as a groupie, though it's hard not to admire such a success story. I'm saying this as an observer of the facts. These guys are the best in the world at what they do in the most competitive industry. Even with the passing of Steve Jobs last year, Apple has only grown stronger, beating Wall Street predictions for earnings just this week. Who would dare to challenge Apple's dominance? Well, actually, lots of people are trying. Research in Motion, their BlackBerry is in a dogfight against Apple's iPhone. It's not going well for BlackBerry. BlackBerry's Playbook lost the fight with the iPad pretty badly, but others are taking a run at Apple too. Phones using Google's Android operating system are a serious rival. 700,000 new Android phones are bought every single day. And a whole range of companies are doing the battle for tablet computers, like Samsung, to name just one. That's a rival to the iPad. In other words, it's the biggest fight amongst the biggest companies in the world with enormous budgets. Google is sitting on $45 billion in cash. Apple has $98 billion in cash. I mean, it's amazing to watch. As a consumer, it's great news. Some people are going to get very rich. Others are going to lose their shirts. So who decided to jump into this ultra-competitive industry yesterday? Who announced that they intend to take on Apple's online music store called iTunes? You know, the same iTunes that is the #1 music seller in the world, that sold more than 10 billion songs online, that has 88% of the legal online market for music sales, that now sells countless TV shows and movies too, as well as other applications for computers and smartphones. Yeah, that iTunes. Well, the CBC announced yesterday that it's going to take a run at them too. Yeah. Listen, we've got the world's best company that made a $26 billion profit last year, Apple, that has one of the most successful corporate cultures of innovation. And then we've got the CBC, a labor union-run government broadcaster that requires an annual corporate bailout of $1.1 billion, that's known for its obscure politics and its righteous sense of entitlement. And they're going to fight it out. Now, don't get me wrong. If some company wants to take a run at iTunes, good luck. I mean, all the better for consumers, right? Maybe they can make a better program or offer better prices or whatever. I mean, taking on iTunes is like setting out in a canoe to take on the U.S. Navy's aircraft carriers. I really wouldn't care about this, other than the CBC is owned by the Canadian government and paid for by taxpayers, that is you and me. Question, if some stranger knocked on your door and told you they were going to set up a company to take on Apple and asked you to buy shares from them and asked you for a check, would you pay them? I wouldn't. I mean, I don't have that kind of appetite for commercial risk with my savings. I don't like buying junk bonds. So I'd say, hey, I wish you all the best, but please use your own money or find someone else's. But not the CBC. They just take our money. Well, that's actually not quite true, is it? James Moore, the Conservative cabinet minister in charge of the CBC, gives them our money. We never had a say in it. So here we are in an era of deficits when the Canadian government has announced that we're going to see major cutbacks in all areas of government spending. But the make-believe pretend businessmen at the CBC have a bright idea, a government-run iTunes competitor. Of course they do, because they don't have to raise the money from investors or persuade a bank. They just have to persuade the bank of James Moore. Sure, he'll gamble taxpayers' money to take on iTunes. Cuckoo. Now, look, there are many other private companies doing what the CBC is proposing to do. They're not as big as iTunes, of course, but they're private companies, like Canadian companies like TELUS and Bell. Here's a list of them. A company called PureTracks. They're having a go at it, risking their own shareholders' money. I don't know if they're profitable. I hope they are, but again, I really don't care because I'm not involved. No one is forcing me to pay for it through my taxes. That's a list of companies taking on iTunes right now. The CBC has struck a deal with something called Music Canada, which represents Canadian music companies. And Music Canada is thrilled by this, saying the deal is entrepreneurial. Really? Come on. So signing a contract with the government is now called entrepreneurial, eh? Now, I tweeted about this yesterday, if you know what I mean, on Twitter. I said how much I'm looking forward to government music. Maybe it'll be as great as the CBC's government journalism. And Graham Henderson, the president of Music Canada, well, he tweeted back, and here's what he said. He said, Ezra, this is a commercial agreement. Entrepreneurial, good for creators, fans, investors, and taxpayers. Oh, really? If it's good for investors, then why does it need government money? I mean, surely investors like things that are good for them. If it's good for taxpayers, then why do we have to bail out the CBC to the tune of $1.1 billion every year? And if it's so good for everyone involved, then why can't we see the contract? Why is it a secret? Can we see the terms of this deal, please? Or am I supposed to believe the government now without any question? What might a government version of iTunes look like? Will it be like other government-funded art, like maybe the gorgeous music from the Red Army Choir? I wonder if we'll be able to get great government tunes like this one on the new government-funded iTunes replacement. Quite stirring and patriotic. That's the Soviet national anthem. That's great government music. I predict we'll be able to download this very track for a few rubles from the CBC's iTunes. Now, what will this online service be called? Something bureaucratic, I bet. Maybe, I don't know, the Canadian Recording Artists Programming Initiative. Sounds government-y. Canadian Recording. The acronym just happens to be CRAPI, C-R-A-P-I, just by coincidence. But listen, I hate to say it. When governments try to get involved in high-tech businesses, they always fail. Because governments aren't built to compete in entrepreneurial high-tech worlds. They're built to be grantrepreneurs, not entrepreneurs. There's a difference. Remember when the government of Alberta invested in a cell phone company called Novotel? Oh, they were going to make a killing. Totally flatten the competition at the time. Nokia, Motorola, and other private companies. There's a Novotel phone right there. How awesome is that? That's next to no iPhone. Look at this. Look at this. This is an ad for the Novotel phone. Look at that big advantage. A volume button and a function key. How could they not win? The Alberta government's cell phone. Taxpayers took a bath. Oh, and then there's the French government's plan. You know, they had a plan for a government-run internet called Minitel. You could only get it through the French government. It was going to be totally awesome. No, total blowout is what happened. Billions wasted when the government thought they could build a better internet than Microsoft and Apple and the rest of the private sector. But James Moore thinks he will succeed where these other government-funded high-tech boondoggles have failed. Look, I have no opinions about the music industry, man. I don't care who the biggest or best music seller is. I mean, may the best company win. May consumers benefit. That's what's important to me. Now, I am for property rights, including intellectual property, but that's about all of my political views on this subject. But when the government decides to get into the entertainment business with our tax dollars to take on private investors, not just at Apple, but those other companies I showed you, well, then it is something I care about very much. The CBC is a failure at what it does now. It blows through $1 billion a year, and it's been made irrelevant by the 500-channel universe we live in. It no longer has a rationale other than inertia. Well, you gave us money last year, so do it again. The CBC is less relevant than ever, but it's more arrogant than ever, a sense of entitlement. Look, sell them. Set them free. Let private investors take the risk. Go take on Apple. Go buy BlackBerry. I don't care. Just keep taxpayers like me out of it. If James Moore thinks that expanding the CBC into the internet business is what being a conservative is about, then he ought to look up the word conservative in the dictionary. We don't need a government news organization like Pravda, and we don't need a crappy government alternative to iTunes either.